For talking to us this morning, Nicola Sturgeon. What's the plan then? Are you really going to hold a second referendum?
We think Scotland should have a choice over the next couple of years about whether we want to Brexit with the rest of Britain or whether we'd rather have the future as an independent country within Europe. I mean, if you look back to the European Council meeting a couple of weeks ago that extended the UK's membership, around a dozen of the 27 countries making that decision were smaller than or similar in size to Scotland. Being independent in Europe is a normal thing for nations, and it would allow Scotland to continue to play our full part in Europe, while of course continuing to foster our relationships with other countries across the British Isles. So that choice of independence is one that I think should be open to Scotland, given that we didn't choose Brexit. Most people in Scotland voted against that.
In 2014, the majority who voted to remain part of the UK. It's been voted for. It's done. Only 4 or 5 years ago.
Look, in 2014, people did vote to remain in the UK. I'm not arguing with that. But since 2014, I think most people across the UK would find it hard to argue that things haven't changed pretty significantly. In 2014, those who argued against Scottish independence said that one of the reasons we should reject it was that we would get thrown out of the European Union. And here we are a few years later, facing being taken out of the European Union against our will, with all of the economic and social damage that that is likely to do to us for perhaps generations to come. So this is about the people of Scotland having the opportunity to choose our own future, to decide whether we want Brexit or do we want an alternative path as an independent country. It's democracy, given the changes that have happened since that last referendum in 2014.
Let me put this to you when it comes to criticism of you asking or wanting to hold another referendum. The country is already pretty divided because of Brexit, the UK and Scotland as well. Why be more divisive by trying to offer another referendum? Surely this is you trying to prove to your party that you're on top of something.
Well, look, I'm acutely aware of the divisions that Brexit has caused, not just Brexit, but the incompetent handling of Brexit by the Prime Minister and the UK government. The first point I would make about that is division can't be allowed to suppress genuine differences of opinion about the future of a country, but how we conduct debate is very important. So when I set out my intention about a referendum 2 days ago in the Scottish Parliament, I also made a very open offer to other parties in Scotland who don't think independence is right for the country to come forward with ideas about how we can strengthen the Scottish Parliament with additional powers to help us mitigate what we face as a result of Brexit. And I'm prepared to be open-minded about these discussions. Can we give the Scottish Parliament more powers over the economy and trade, powers to ensure we have a bigger voice in the UK and in Europe? I've not heard back from those parties yet in any substantive way, but I hope there will be a willingness to talk, because politicians should be prepared, notwithstanding our deeply held convictions about issues, we should be prepared to come together and try to find areas of common ground. I also announced that we will establish a citizens' assembly in Scotland to bring a representative cross-section of the Scottish public together to look at what are we trying to achieve in Scotland, what are the barriers to do it, how do we overcome the challenges. I've been struck by the use of that model of participative democracy in Ireland, which has allowed them to find consensus on some very controversial issues. So I do agree that all politicians have a real duty right now to try to overcome division and to conduct debate in a very respectful manner, and I hope to be able to do that.
Can you talk to me about the EU elections which are coming up? The SNP revealed the list of 6 candidates this week. What are you hoping to achieve with the European elections, EU elections?
Well, we hope to win the elections in Scotland. We hope to get more votes than any other party, and there's an opinion poll out in Scotland that puts us generally 19 points ahead of our nearest rival. So go into these elections with great optimism. Unlike Labour in Scotland, certainly unlike the Conservatives, we've got an unambiguous, unequivocal policy on the issue of Europe. We want Scotland to remain part of the European Union. We have 2 of those 6 seats in Scotland right now. We'd certainly want to keep those. We'd like to build on that if we possibly can, but we'll be working over these next few weeks for every vote that we can win.
Do you think it's worth it if Brexit...
take elections for granted.
Apologies for talking over you. Do you think it's worth it if Brexit happens?
Sorry. Well, I hope Brexit doesn't happen, and now I think there is every reason to hope that there's a possibility of that. I don't think, obviously, that can be guaranteed. We still have to work on the assumption that the UK is leaving the EU, but those of us who think that's the wrong decision, I think, should be willing and prepared to campaign as hard as we possibly can for that outcome. What I think would be a democratic outrage now is if the European elections were suddenly cancelled, given that parties are preparing, that voters are starting to think about the issues. So, I look forward to being able to conduct a campaign here in Scotland that is very internationalist, European, outward-looking, that comes from the perspective of believing, as I do, that countries should be independent, but that in the modern world, independent countries should come together to work together.
So you think the EU election should happen regardless of what happens with Brexit?
Well, I can't see, and I preface this remark by admitting that it's very difficult to predict things in UK politics right now, but I can't see how the Prime Minister is going to get any kind of agreement that will take the UK out of the EU before the European elections. Now, I may be proved wrong on that, but I think everybody should now, for the sake of allowing voters to start to weigh up these issues and make their decisions, I think everybody now should decide that the European elections are going ahead. That will allow the options for the UK to remain open, of course, and I hope one of those options is for the UK to remain in the EU longer term.
Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister of Scotland, leader of the SNP, thank you very much for talking to us on Breakfast this morning.
Thank you.
That brings us to 7:46 the time, so let's go over